There's a lot of examples at the federal level that have affected us primarily through the rollback of the Inflation Reduction Act. We've already created our own process and system to exist in a non-tax credit environment. There wasn't always the Inflation Reduction Act. We didn't assume that that would ever necessarily be passed. So we've created a system where we do strategic designs for each specific client and location based on the actual environment that home or business finds itself in order to maximize production, meet the goals of those clients. And that will most likely mean systems will be slightly smaller without a tax credit, but we'll be able to really maximize the efficiency of systems and speed up those paybacks without tax credits for residential. And we've already built that into our process, whereas I think a lot of other solar companies have kind of relied on sort of the quick, having the auto software AI design that kind of just slaps panels on a model building that they're not taking the time to sit there and actually really see what is the height of those trees that are going to cause shading. Are we near a farm field that's going to cause soiling on those modules that's going to increase system loss? We dial all that in. So we're going to be able to be very confident in what we're providing our clients and still maximizing their value without the need for a tax credit. And then a lot of people too will pair that with battery installations that can be programmed to help offset those time of use and demand charges. So the train's left the station. The technology is too good at this point to not still be a good investment, especially if you're pairing that with strategic design approach and then having a company that stands by their work through our free service warranty. There continues to be a lack of uniformity across jurisdictions across the state, from different local municipalities or cities to counties. They have varying approaches to certain standards when it comes to things like setbacks, for instance. And so we have been able to continue to navigate that. And that just takes some due diligence of contacting each of these local departments and jurisdictions and making sure we're very clear on how they interpret code so we can make sure all permits are always passed and approved. So that is a challenge that we have pushed and asked the state for more of that uniformity across the board, but that is something that is still lacking, and that is a challenge that we are, continuing to navigate. The challenges we face this year beyond the federal level, which obviously that's substantial with the loss of the tax credits, but when we break it down and look at the local level, there are challenges that we've overcome this year as well, and that oftentimes can come down to things like who is the inspector of authority whose job it is to go and inspect a system and understand what they're seeing in order to approve a permit. And unfortunately, while we're about to cross our 10-year mark since we've been in business, it is still overall a quite new technology that a lot of inspectors, frankly, just have never had any exposure to and aren't familiar with. So they're trying to apply a broad general code application to something that is specific, and then trying to make sense of it. And that can sometimes cause delays based on a lack of knowledge, a delay of approval, which is unfortunate when we had done it right the whole time. But an inspector needs to understand how this works. And it's new to many of them. And in some cases, they're also shorthanded. I mean, we've seen locally that there's one inspector covering the entire city. And that can be challenging because now you're waiting to get back on their schedule because they're shorthanded. And then if they aren't super knowledgeable with what they're actually reviewing or inspecting, so they need to kind of take a pause and go and do their own research, based on how we're walking them through the systems. Well, then now we need to get back on their calendar. And then that can frustrate clients, understandably, because there's kind of this misconception that because an inspector didn't kind of give that green light the first time they were out, that must mean there's something wrong with the system. And because they're delayed on coming back to give that final, approval, that must mean that we maybe weren't trying to schedule it soon enough, which the reality is that, we have examples of this where the system was perfect from jump. It was done exactly right to code, to standards, safety standards, and everything else from day one. And we do our best to try to explain the reality of some of these things for those that aren't familiar with how this industry works. But sometimes that only gets so far. And I do empathize with the delays when that happens, of course. but there's only so much that we can do when it comes to those local inspectors and permitting authorities. And ultimately, though, as with every installation, all permits are always approved. The system's always going to be approved and safe and interconnected as you'd expect. And then our free service warranty for 3 years stands behind all of that anyways. I'm actually very proud of our team and how we've been able to adapt to those challenges. And then also how that actually sets up success for the end of the year for our clients and into next year. As we approach kind of towards the end of 25, the for-profit utilities in particular have started to enact some different approaches to things like batteries or transformers or approval of interconnection applications. And so we have made those adjustments in order to make sure all interconnection applications are always approved for our clients. And we did face something unexpected this year where Consumers Energy did release an email that really no one in the industry was expecting, that set a hard deadline of October 1st for their interconnection applications if you want to have an installation this year. So that kind of came out of nowhere, and it was a bit of a curveball for our team, but with that information, we're able to act on it in time, and we were able to get all of our interconnection applications in for all of our clients by that deadline. It wasn't necessarily easy. Our team kind of jumped to and put in some extra hours to make sure that was done, but we did not want to risk there being any issues for any of our clients, their tax credits coming into the end of the year if they didn't get approvals quick enough, so we were able to meet that challenge, but it has been difficult at times. So the cost of electricity, while nobody likes that going up, the fact is it's going to start to climb faster than normal, and that's not going to stop. So solar pairs perfectly with high costs of electricity. There might be a lack of a residential tax credit next year. As rates continue to climb exponentially, the value of an investment in solar climbs with it because you are insulating yourself from those future, rate hikes. And then we also have a lot of events already starting to be planned next year for group buy programs that allow residential homeowners to group up together to get substantial discounts, which helps to offset tax credit loss. So there are still a ton of avenues in which solar is not only valuable, but increasing in value as rates climb. And solar produces the most energy at peak rate times, which are afternoons in the summer when everybody's AC is kicking on. That's when demand charges peak. That's also when solar produces the most. So the value is going to just continue to rise as those demand charges increase.